Okay, so now that we have an introduction to social inequality, this lecture will explore problematizing social inequality, framing social inequality as a problem. So your required readings are Flores, Chapter 2. There are also 2 activities this week. The graded discussion board post. Ensure that this is completed prior to Sunday at 2 p.m. You should incorporate all course materials. So reflect on the readings and any clips that have been shown up to this point. It should be 500 words or less. And as well, there is a video clip at the very end of this lecture to review, which is Canada's Growing Gap Explained. There are a few learning objectives for this week. The first is to demonstrate how references to social inequality are not self-explanatory. The second is to problematize the concept of social inequality by unpacking terms of social and inequality. The third is to assess the value of reframing social inequality and social exclusion. The fourth is to point out how sociology provides a distinct and interpretive lens for study inequalities of exclusion. And the fifth is to explain how the ideology of neoliberalism is pivotal. Okay, so let's begin with the introduction. Establishing the perimeters. Patterns of inequality involving exclusions of power, privilege, or property are the rule rather than the exception. In this case, property can be considered both income and wealth. Many Canadians regard income disparities as normal and necessary, just a fact of life. Rewards, for instance, are based on hard work. So if you put in the time and effort, you deserve the rewards. You deserve a higher income. Or the belief in meritocracy, which is the government or the holding of the power by the people selected on the basis of their ability. So if they have the ability, then that's right. They should have the power in society. How does one justify, for instance, income differences? Canadian Prime Minister earns $327,000. NHL entry-level player earns $550,000. How can we explain these differences? Does the Prime Minister do less work than an NFL player? How do we justify these differences in income, even at a very high level, where both of these individuals would have power and prestige and property as a result of their income levels? So what is it about living in a society that creates those inequalities of exclusions that deny or diminish? Should individuals be held responsible for their predicament? So should we blame the victim if they do not have those resources, if they're not able to work to the same degree, or if they do not have the skill set because they were unable to attend higher education? Or, for instance, are the victims of structural exclusions beyond the control of the individual? So are there other issues going on that's beyond them? Other structural barriers? Or is it the interplay of agency and structure within the international context of a specific situation? So instead of blaming the situation. So what's going on? We need to have these questions in the back of our mind as we are establishing the perimeters of social inequality. So turn to a sociology of social inequality. What does sociology bring to the table that enhances our understanding of social life in general and the inequalities of exclusion in particular? There are 8 points. The first is data-driven, research-based analysis and assessment. Second is complexity and contextuality of human behavior. The third, human realities as socially constructed. The fourth, a critical orientation, debunking of taken for granted ideas and appearances. The fifth, searching for root causes of human behavior. The sixth, generalization orientations, understanding the sociological imagination. The seventh, discovering the social dimensions of human life. The eighth, a multi-perspectival approach, examining the trifecta of society, reality, and social behavior framed from a variety of perspectives. So reframing inequality as exclusion. Many definitions of social inequality focus on a narrow economic perspective, or economic inequality. Social inequality framed through the prism of exclusion points to a range of disadvantages and deprivations that go beyond income differences. So it's not just income differences, there's more to this picture of income inequality. So, social exclusion. Unequal conditions that preclude opportunity and access to social citizenship. Unequal allocation of services and resources, as well as rights and capabilities, social alienation, barriers to active participation in cultural, social, and political and economic activities. So there are, for instance, some services and resources that are allocated for certain individuals in society. Thinking about employment insurance, which is allocated to those who are working, but those who, in cases of extreme poverty, homelessness, do not have access to that service, which is designed to help support individuals in times of labor market fluctuation. So they can't access a service out there that could help get them back into the labor market because they are deemed not searching for work. The inability to contribute as a valued and recognized and respectable member of a community is another form of social exclusion. Membership in groups that suffer from real deprivation due to lack of food, shelter, and clothing. Denials and discrimination from structural exclusions, systemic biases and barriers that preempt a person's full potential as a human and full participation as a citizen. Social exclusion is more attuned to the following 5 points. Processes, relations, and barriers. Second, diminishing of individuals' full potential to function as human beings. Third, highlight quality of life indicators. The fourth, the structural dimensions of disadvantage, alienation, deprivation, systemic barriers, and systemic biases. And the final is the focus on the centrality of exclusiveness as a necessary discourse. So now turning to inequality as social stratification. Stratification is the division of society into unequal vertical layers of inequality known as strata. It entails an arrangement by which categories of persons are grouped together into different statuses according to shared commonalities in occupation, income, wealth, class, and race or ethnicity. These categories are hierarchical, ranked into layers of unequal worth, and arranged in ascending and descending order. So Marx noted the stratification system embodied an economic dimension. Weber, stratification systems reflective of individuals' market position. So why should we deconstruct social inequality? What's social about social inequality? The first one is inequality is defined as social when it's perceived to originate in society or within a social context. So for instance, society is the one to blame. The second is inequality is social when defined as an issue or concern to society. The third, inequality is social because it is amenable to reform through government action or institution reform. Finals, inequality is social when it exerts a negative impact on society or inflicts harm on segments of society. So let's now turn to wealth as health, the social determinants of health and healthcare inequality. So it's believed in our society, in Canada, that we have this universal healthcare system, that everyone has equal access to it. There's actually a lot of pitfalls to it. So for instance, many Canadians do not have access to a family physician. Millions of Canadians are also without dental insurance because this is not covered our universal healthcare system. Many newcomers and Aboriginal people lack access to high-quality healthcare because of who they are and where they live. So if social and economic factors influence health outcomes, then social economic policies can modify unequal health outcomes. So if you think about if you live in a lower socioeconomic area, you have maybe difficulties even maintaining a healthy lifestyle because the food in those areas tends to be more calorie intake. You also might have access to a gym. You might have access to see a doctor regularly to ensure that your annual checkups are going well. And you can see how this all perpetuates into the situation where health is heavily connected to social inequality. Okay, so let's turn to the health inequalities of Aboriginal people. They live on average a decade less than other Canadians. They experience degenerative diseases twice the rate of non-Aboriginal people. They are twice as lucky to have cancer, 5 times more likely to have diabetes, to suffer from parasitic and infectious diseases, 16 times higher than the rest of Canada, infant mortality rate 3 times higher than the average national average. Aboriginal children are more likely to be born with severe birth defects and debilitating conditions. Alcohol-related injuries from suicides to sexual violence account for up to 80% of the fatalities on some reserves. So now let's move to deconstructing the inequality of social inequality. Inequality is analytically interesting. The following 5 points. Socially constructed, created by human interactivity. Second is patterned and persistent and pervasive. The third is arbitrary and unjustified. The fourth is harmful to some demographic and society. And the fifth, resistance to reform. So think about material and objective. Social variations in power and privilege and resources. In terms of ideological support, patterns of inequality are justified and secured by the ideas and ideals. Ideology serves to function 3 points: to conceal the social constructedness of inequality, to rationalize or justify the prevailing patterns of power and privilege, to secure the dominant groups of supremacy over the less fortunate, and then neoliberalism as an ideology. So that free, laissez-faire market is the best location to relocate and redistribute goods and resources within society. Let's turn to social power. Marx, reflected in class relations. Power flows from the ownership of the productive property and resources with a corresponding ideology as a form of social control. Inequality as a power arose from structural and systemic sources related to exploitation and class differences between the exploiter and the exploited. Social power in relation to Weber. Power is based on the interlinkage of class, status, and party. Framed power as the ability to command resources and people. Define power along lines of social position, status, goal-oriented groups, political parties, and family background, which is class. Michel Foucault noted power constitutes a set of capacities, discourses, expert knowledge, or knowledge relationships that are pervasive and dispersed through society. Power is everywhere, yet nowhere, as it is diffused, fragmented, discursive, subjective, and objective. Okay, so the language of media representations, framing as power. Media perpetuates an exclusionary effort. Migrant peoples and minorities are inferiorized by association with negative new contexts. A racially white frames whiteness as culture superior, an achievement compared to racialized non-whiteness. It insinuates white-dominated institutions and white privilege as unremarkable, perpetuates stereotypes by essentializing the lived realities of minorities. Systemic whiteness distorts or denies the experiences and realities of those on the wrong side of the racialized divide. So it blames the victim. It individualizes racism. So personal prejudice is another term for this. And ahistorical perspective, dismissing cumulative inequalities or the persistence of colonialism. It decontextualizes reality. It problematizes deep diversity. The belief in the post-racial Canada, that racism does not exist in Canada, and the white normativity as a universal standard. Language and power. Language is socially constructed, determines our understanding of reality while dismissing other renditions as uncoincidental or incompatible. It's a powerful force, reinforcing and defining what is desirable, acceptable, normal, and important. Power implicit within the context of language and everyday discourses and practices. So just by speaking every day, you are encouraging this power dynamic, encouraging the discourses of social inequality that we abide by. So neo-Marxists, the Foucauldian orientation, contends that power in its ability to influence outcomes in its disciplinary because it is deeply embedded in our founding assumptions and foundational principles of society's constitutional order, the structure of social institutions and ideological values, focuses on the minds of the subjects through dominant discourses. So for instance, the media. It assumes a lenient form rather than a visibly manifested form. It reinforces that power is most powerful when it is least visible and most imprecise. So there's different ways to approach social reform. It can contain formal and informal strategies for challenging inequality. It can vary in scope, orientation, and style. Some are concerned with partial change. So maybe let's provide better access to different resources to get an individual back into the labor market or complete retraining. Some are concerned with complete overhaul, having a revolution, removing those who are in power in society, for instance. Some are concerned with reversing current trends by reasserting conventional values and traditional structures. Okay, so to conclude this lecture, the concept of social inequality are not self-explanatory, but must be problematized. Inequality defined in terms of who gets what differential access and what goes where, differential distribution. The concept of social inequality can be deconstructed by unpacking its terms into social and inequality. The importance of framing social inequality as social exclusions. Sociology is also a distinctive lens for studying inequalities. 4 key dimensions associated with inequality are the material, the ideology, power, and reform, social movements. Ideology of neoliberalism remakes Canada along more exclusionary lines. Systemic nature of power demonstrates through the media to construct distorted images. Okay, so now moving on to the next activity for this week. Be watching the video clip called Canada's Growing Gap Explained. Following this, there will be a graded discussion board post. The discussion board post question is, Flores notes that we should problematize social inequality. Do you agree? Why or why not? Ensure that you answer this on the discussion board prior to Sunday at 2 p.m. Best of luck.